All right, we're in. So, guys, let's do this. Let's do this and let's have fun in this day and talk about synths. So, I'm streaming already. I already have a message here from somebody. I'll be in a minute. Great, Basia. See you soon. So, let's go. Let me just switch this off and get this party started. So, have you guys, yeah, let's do this. Have you guys seen the show Mr. Robot? Anybody has? Hmm. I'm not, like I told you, I don't have a great music culture. Sorry, music culture. I do have, I don't have a great movie culture. But hey, this thing is really amazing. Like, if you can watch it, I really recommend it. It was like 2015. It's really sweet. And the reason why I start with that is I wanted to share with you a song. Like, I mean, from the soundtrack of that movie. By the way, when I cut my hair short, I always, which I do every once in a while, that's my hero. You know, I always go like, okay, I want the hair like him. So he's Elliot Alderson, and he's a hacker. I really love this stereotype of a person, and I mean what he means and everything. And the movie is just the series is great, and the soundtrack is just a masterpiece, really. So I mean, the point is just to start exploring the universe of synths. I guess that I'll get a copyright strike for this, but whatever. I don't have monetization anyway, so... Let me check, by the way, that... it's not going... well, it's actually not going to the video, so... Check this out. This first song is amazing. Yeah, well, I can play it all day. I just really love this. But I just love this type of music. But anyways, synths are a music world of their own. Of course, you can do a lot of really interesting things with synths. And I'm sure that you use them a lot. I'm sure that you use presets and move around. And maybe you know what each one of those knobs do or not. If you know it, great. If you don't know it, that's what we're going to learn in the next days, you know, in the next lectures. Both in the internal area of our computer and in the external area of the world. So we're going to see all of them. the three synths that we have here, the Korg, the Minilog, and this is called MS-10, the Minilog, and the Juno 60, and also we will see a whole bunch of plugin synths that I have here that are going to be really cool for us to explore. So I always want you guys to understand like why they exist, why something exists, because if you understand why something exists, then you can kind of picture how it's used and why it was created and what's the story. So you can do your own research on synthesizers, because it's a whole world. I want you to identify the basic components of most synths. You're going to learn that all synths, all these knobs are always the same. You know, there are these standards, you know, like, oh, this is like that, and then the manufacturers repeat that so everybody can understand that. And so you can kind of find yourself in any synth. What happens is like when you know what these knobs do, you land on any synth and you're looking for certain aspects so you can manipulate them. And I want you to remember the overview of the history of synthesizers, so you can expand your knowledge or want to see what a synth is and why it was created and all of that. So first we're going to rehear something that we have already heard so we can understand what's the principle behind synths. You will see what I mean. I mean visualization Fourier. We're going to introduce the idea of synth. We're going to ask the question like, is the mind capable of infinity? We're going to talk about the early days, then we're going to see it like 60s, 70s, and then we're going to talk about monophonic versus polyphonic, what that means. We're going to talk about a person called Bob Moog, who is one of the pioneers of the synth history. We're going to talk about a person called Wendy Carlos, which is also one of the pioneers of the synth history. Then we're going to talk about the 80s, and then, well, we're going to identify some sounds and go through basic concepts. So, I don't know if you remember. I guess that I still have this slide. I think that slide I repeated like 10 million times. No, I didn't. I just want to put it here again. It's kind of like in the first lecture that we had. There was a slide there that for me, it's really key to understand everything we're talking about. So I'm just gonna copy that slide and drop it there. Again, because I love it. Yeah, it's this slide. Like, I think we cannot watch it enough. I mean, can you please help me to move this? Copy and paste it here. Is it working? No. Latna. I don't know why he's doing that, but yeah, there you go. That's great. So hello, good to see you. So I don't know if you remember this, but you know, complex waveforms can be decomposed into simpler waveforms. That's an equivalent to 2 + 2 = 4, or 4 can be 2 + 2, but also 4 can be 200 divided by 100. You know, you can arrive to the same numbers through different paths. And the important thing to pay attention to here is that, yeah, like, I mean, that what we think it's a unity, it's really a composition of many things. Like, come on, GIF, you should have reacted with me. What we think is a unity is really a composition of different things. There you go. And the same happens with light, obviously. So I don't know if you remember this video. We have seen it. I'm going to play it again just to refresh us something here. You can, if you grab those components, I mean, just like to explain my idea better, just like you can grab a complex waveform and decompose it into simpler components. I mean, it's kind of like a, I mean, imagine that. This is so hard in matter, you know, imagine that you have an apple and you decompose it into its molecules, and then you have the building blocks of the apple, and then you can build any fruit with that, kind of. It just doesn't work like that in nature, because it's nature. I mean, apples are way much more complex than sound waves, even though it doesn't feel like that, but they really are way much more complex than sound waves. But in the case of sound waves, you really can decompose a complex waveform into simpler components, or you can grab the simple components to build a complex waveform. It's just the nature of how waveforms work, you know. You remember there was something called constructive interference, like I talked along the way, which is like what happens when things are in phase, when two things are the same and they're in phase, and then they reinforce each other. And there's another thing called destructive interference, where things are out of phase and they cancel each other. So, I mean, you can see this sort of process illustrated here in a way. I mean, when I grab like these two waveforms and I sound them together, I mean, it's kind of like when I grab all of these and sum it together, I get like a specific result that is the product of those little components being cancelled out and reinforced to create a new waveform that is a unique, let's say, object in the universe, and that is composed of those parts. So, I mean, the reason why I'm telling you this is that synthesizers are kind of like, imagine, you see these blue lines? Imagine oscillator 1, oscillator 2, oscillator 3. Like synthesizers are simple components that when you put them together, they create richer sounds, just like that. And that is based on something called the Fourier transformation, which is really, really, really one of the most important things that happened to humanity, like the understanding of this mathematics. And it was done by this guy, which I cannot talk more because, I mean, I love him so much. We owe him everything. So now, let's remember this for a second, okay? So you see, this is called Fourier series, and if you start seeing his name, you're going to see him everywhere. So you remember this video, right? Do you remember it or not?
What a sine wave sounds like.
So we have a sound wave, and this is how a sine wave sounds like.
This is what a sawtooth.
And this is a sawtooth.
And this is what a sawtooth wave sounds like.
So that's how sawtooth wave sounds.
Wave can be decomposed into a sum of sine waves of different frequencies.
And then I'm gonna get to a sawtooth wave, right? Starts appearing there. So what's happening there? What's happening there is that, I mean, you can imagine the sawtooth. You can imagine it for a moment, like the number 7. Just imagine a number 7. And then how do you get to number 7? Well, you grab 100, you subtracted 70, then you have 30. I'm making a super metaphor there. And then you sum to that 100 again, and now you have 130. And then you subtract 90, and so on until you get to the number 7. Why is that happening? Because, like you see, like in this moment, this waveform, for a little moment they're in phase and then they're out of phase. Like let's say here you see like I'm up and here I'm down, and the same is happening with the waveform underneath. And so when this thing starts getting summed up together, they're going to produce a waveform that is really different to the original, because cancellations are like minuses and reinforcements are like pluses. So we get the production of a new waveform out of simpler components, and that's how we get into a new waveform, right? So, I mean, I don't know if you remember this. In this video, we also demonstrated like the case of a piano, for example, like a piano sound. And then we decomposed, well, not we, the author of this video, thankfully, decomposed those into sine waves, right? So the point is that, let's hear it. He's cheating there, like he's super cheating there, but yeah. With the trumpet, it's more clear actually. How it becomes a trumpet. There it is. It's already a trumpet. So, point being is that you can get to very complex waveforms with very simple things. And as you're going to see in this journey, like little modifications of things are going to make like immense changes. Now, this is a bit of a more advanced visualization and understanding of the Fourier transformations. I will skip a bit. I am aware that those of you who are online, if there is anybody online, cannot hear the audio from YouTube. I just don't know why it's not happening right now, but I'm not going to suffer with that. Like, if something, you can watch these videos. I mean, I just don't want to stop the lecture anymore. And also, I don't want to get a copyright strike, so why not?
This right here is what we're going to build to this video. A certain animated approach to thinking about a super important idea from math.
I really don't expect you to learn from this video. I want to show you how deep the rabbit hole goes, okay? Just so you have like an idea of
The Fourier transform. For anyone unfamiliar with what that is.
By the way, notice what's happening here. This is really interesting. Like this is another way of visualizing a waveform, by the way. Look at how the arrow is moving.
My number one goal here is just for the video to be an introduction to that topic. But even for those of you who are already familiar with it, I still think that there's something fun and enriching
Yay.
seeing what all of its components actually look like.
I mean, what is this? It's like what is this diagram? Is things that are out of phase and in phase rotating against each other. Because I mean, we tend to see waveforms very much in a bidimensional plane, but things are obviously super three-dimensional, and they just don't behave like that. So these two graphs. This is very crazy, but these two graphs, the one that you see up here and the rotation of those spheres, are analog. They are equal to each other.
A typical example to start is going to be the classic law, decomposing frequencies from sound. But after that, I also really want to show a glimpse of how this idea extends to...
So I mean, you can see kind of here, this is the product of the summatory of these waveforms, right?
well beyond sound and frequency into many seemingly disparate areas of math and even physics. Really, it is crazy just how ubiquitous this idea is. Let's dive in. This sound right here is a pure A, 440 beats per second, meaning if you were to measure the air pressure right next to your headphones or your speaker as a function of time, it would oscillate up and down around its usual equilibrium in this wave, making 440 oscillations each second. A lower pitch note, like a D, has the same structure, just fewer beats per second. And when both of them are played at once, what do you think the resulting pressure versus time graph looks like? Well, at any point in time, this pressure difference is going to be the sum of what it would be for each of those notes individually, which, let's face it, is kind of a complicated thing to think about. At some points, the peaks match up with each other, resulting in a really high pressure.
That's the constructive interference, right?
At other points, they tend to cancel out.
That's the destructive
Overall,
interference.
what you get is a wave-ish pressure versus time graph that is not a pure sine wave. It's something more complicated.
So we started with pure sine tones, and then we got something more complicated. It's kind of like the history of the universe, you know? You start with hydrogen, and then you end up with TikTok.
And as you add in other notes, the wave gets more and more complicated. But right now, all it is a combination of 4 pure frequencies. So it seems needlessly complicated given the low amount of information put into it. A microphone recording any sound just picks up on the air pressure at many different points in time. It only sees the final sum. So our central question is going to be how you can take a signal like this and decompose it into the pure frequencies that make it up. Pretty interesting, right? Adding up those signals really mixes them all together. So pulling them back apart feels akin to unmixing multiple paint
Yeah.
that have all been stirred up together. The general strategy is going to be to build for ourselves a mathematical machine that treats signals with a given frequency differently from how it treats other signals. To start, consider simply taking a pure signal, say with a lowly 3 beats per second, so that we can plot it easily. And let's limit ourselves to looking at a finite portion of this graph. In this case, the portion between 0 seconds and 4.5 seconds. The key idea is going to be to take this graph and sort of wrap it up around a circle. Concretely, here's what I mean by that. Imagine a
From here onwards is when the video becomes outside of what we need to cover. So I just wanted you to have a visualization, a bit of feeling that this is going on. That, I mean, if you sit down and watch this video, you will learn a gazillion, but it's really outside of over the scope of our lectures and what we're doing. So I really recommend you to watch it if you want to have an idea of what's happening inside the synths. So now that you get this background that you already knew, that you can create waveforms with simpler waveforms and go back and forth from that, that's what is called synthesis. Like the word synthesis means to create, actually, I don't know the exact definition. I mean, of course, I know what the word means, but let's see a definition of it. Like, if I write the word synthesis, what do we get? We're going to get also synthesis in the intellectual. Let's see all these definitions. Like, like the execution of chemical reactions, this is in chemistry, to form a more complex molecule. So there's also seems to be like something simple that takes us into something more complex. Organic synthesis, the chemical synthesis, we already read that chemical synthesis is about getting something more complex from something simple. Let me see, like photosynthesis, a biochemical reaction using carbon molecule to produce an organic molecule. So there's always like components and more complex result, you know. So it seems like electronics, look, logic synthesis, the process of converting higher level form of a design into a lower level implementation. You get the point. Sound synthesis, various method of sound generation in audio electronics. So now, in the context of music as such, you know, we call synthesis the process of creating a sound electronically, and electronically using either an analog or circuitry or code, right? I mean, the principles are the same. How are you going to get there? It kind of doesn't matter. I mean, what matters is that that's what you're doing is creating more complex waveforms from a simple thing. So a synthesizer, by the way, there is like spelled in two ways, you know, synthesizer and synthesizer. You can both use it. It's an electronic musical instrument that makes audio signals. Easy. So, okay, we're going to study all the types, not all, but some of the types of synthesis that there are. So there is one called subtractive synthesis. So out of what we discussed so far today, could you maybe have an idea of what that means? Just by...
You take out the harmonics of the initial waveform.
Correct.
So you basically just dig out those simple sine waves and just synthesize stuff.
Yeah. So you kind of like use destructive interference to create a new sound. You're removing stuff instead of adding. You're more removing stuff. Additive synthesis, I mean, should I ask you the question, or it's kind of like you add stuff instead of removing it. And then there is something called frequency modulation. So that sounds more complicated than what it is, but I can demonstrate you. Let me see if I was thinking if I can demonstrate something with this microphone, like how it feels. But if I do this very fast, actually, I know the best way to show you kind of how frequency modulation works. You know, we will study it in depth, but I'm going to show you something in Ableton that is just going to help you to get it right away. Basically, the definition is you start moving a frequency so fast that that becomes a pitch. Let's explore one idea here. If I take a snare, I'm just going to take anything, a snare, whatever from anywhere. Let's just take a clip here. Well, no, let's just record something. 505 here and just record a snare. Let's record a snare. Put my MIDI keyboard. So check this out. And maybe it seems like Loopback is kind of like asleep today. Yeah. I hope we don't get us. Yeah, we don't have. Great. Okay, cool. So let's record a snare here. Easy. Now let's get audio from this and let's flatten and freeze this guy. So now I have a snare there. If I take this snare and I just duplicate it like this. Let me just turn it down so we don't suffer. So it doesn't sound like a pitch, right? It just sounds like a lot of snares played next to each other. It doesn't have a pitch. Our ears can do this, like, oh, look, there is a snare. Oh, look, there are 2 snares, 3 snares. Like, our ears can understand the separation between each one of those hits. And so our brains do not interpret that as a pitch. Like, there is really something there that happens always in between, like, what is actually happening in nature and how our brain interprets that. What I mean by that is that right now, what there is happening in nature is that a whole bunch of snares are being played together. And our brains have the resolution of distinguishing that. But if we start moving faster, then we're going to get a different situation. Like, look, if I do something like this, and then I duplicate this a lot of times, let's see what happens. Now it becomes a pitch, you see? Now it really, I mean, our brains really don't have the resolution to separate those events, like and so what's happening in nature really is that there is a whole bunch of snares playing repeatedly, but it's happening so fast that our brains just don't have the capacity. It's kind of like, I don't know, when somebody or something passes in front of you so fast that you don't see it like as a car, but you see it more like as a like a thing there that has like a tail or something. But yeah, something like that. Like your brain is not like, it stops being able to resolve that. And so the whole thing becomes a pitch, right? Now, the same happens. Imagine that I do something like this. I'm going to grab here. I'm going to make a synth right now in front of you. So I'm gonna grab here a synthesizer, very simple one, the operator, and so let me see something. So if I want to change the frequency of this guy, I need to, which one is my oscillator here? Yeah, here's my oscillator, this one, and this controls each one of them. And I guess that the frequency is this one. No, that's another thing. We will see it. Sorry, I just don't remember this thing quickly. I guess that the frequency here or the octave. I guess I can do it with this. Yeah, okay. You see, like, so I mean, when I'm doing this, what am I doing? I'm just increasing the amount of cycles per second, right? When I'm doing this. So I'm gonna go to the automation of this. I'm gonna show you something. I'm gonna go to automation of this. Yeah, I can. I'm just. But not everybody knows what an LFO is, so this is very basic lecture. So or maybe I'm underestimating you, and you all know. I don't know. I understand that. I understand that. But these things, like, I mean, we're gonna get deep into the rabbit hole. So I don't mind to repeat some things that you already know, or yeah, it's fine. So what have I done? I missed my signal because did I muted it, or wait, mixer. Speaker on. Did I switch it on? No. Volume. Did I switch it off? What have I done here? It was all working fine until a second ago. So, you know what? Let's just get this quickly done and just do it like this and reload it. Operator. No, that's an audio. Sorry, guys. Let me just get rid of this. Load the operator again. Okay, and grab this thing. And fine. And yeah. So let me just do this. I'm gonna make an automation move here, which is gonna be like this. Okay, and then I'm gonna grab this thing. All I'm doing is changing the frequency, right, of the synth temporarily for a little second. And now I'm gonna grab this thing. Let me just zoom in. I'm gonna grab this thing, and I'm gonna duplicate this movement. I'm doing a lot. So I'm repeating kind of what I did with the snares, right? But I'm doing this with the frequency. So if I do this, that's what an LFO is doing, basically. I mean, it's just a visualization of the LFO. If I do this super fast, then we're gonna get a pitch, right? We're gonna get a new sound, and our brains are not gonna be able to distinguish this up and down movement, and our brains are just gonna be like, oh shit, like that's a new pitch. Let me see if I can do it like that. And then you will see that it will start sounding this, but it will sound like, let me see. I need to do it even faster, and then in a point it's going to become like a new pitch. I'm just curious, sorry, if it's boring, but I just want to see what happens. Like, if I do it like this, and then I duplicate this a million times, looks fine, looks cool, right? So let's see now what happens if I do this. Aha. Now it's a pitch, and then it's not a pitch because it's too slow, and then our brains can distinguish it, right? Nice, nice little sound we made, right? Cool. So that's frequency modulation. I mean, it's when you create a synth that it's moving the frequency so fast that the frequency movement becomes a pitch for us. Before we were doing like, okay, I have a Fourier transformation. I'm going to use Fourier transformations to subtract or add stuff. Now I'm going to just move the frequency so fast of the oscillator that then it's going to become a new frequency. So, and of course, then you have things called like filters and envelopes and low frequency oscillators that I'm happy that you already know a bit about, because it will help us to develop our conversation better. What do we mean by filters? EQs. Let me think about what else usually seen. Sometimes chorus. Sorry. Gates. Sometimes chorus. Like this guy has a chorus filter, for example. Like, and then you kind of like add audio plugins to it, you know, to your synth, depending on what you're trying to build. If you're a synth builder. Envelopes being, you know, just like attack, decay, sustain, release, you know, which you can control. And low frequency oscillators that are, the way I describe them is like, imagine that right now I'm talking here on this on the microphone, and I'm gonna be moving the volume of the of the console here. So I just became a low frequency oscillator with my hand. I mean, it's just imagine that instead of having to hire a person to do that, you could just like make a little robotic fader that is there moving up and down. So a low frequency oscillator is just an event that repeats over time. It's an electric pulse, you know, that is sent across the circuitry of the synth. And what do you do with that? Hey, that's all up to you. And that's what you're going to see it super clearly when we go to this synth. You know, it's like you will see that there is out of these outputs, you know, there is like an electrical pulse that is just moving, you know, in a certain at a certain rate. And then where are you going to send that? What are you going to do with that? It's up to you. You know, it's 100% up to you. And that would become a very useful thing because I mean, as I show you, like for us to talk about gear and processes in audio, it's kind of weird because we are children of the digital age, and so we don't think like that there was an epoch where there were no. I mean, I know that you guys know that there was an epoch where there was no computers, but it's kind of like, I mean, imagine that I go back in. No, it's not even about going back in time. I'm trying to think about the past, and I think about why a building was built in a certain way from the perspective of a person who has electricity. So, I mean, and I'm thinking like, man, why these guys were building a building with some cover for the blackness of the candles? You get my point. And then it's like, well, because they didn't have electricity. So, I mean, you could say something like, why do I even need a low frequency oscillator? Why is it called like that? Why does it exist? It was not a rationale designed to help you to build a synth in software. It was a rationale designed to help you build a synth in hardware, because hardware is not as flexible as software. You know, you can tell to a code to do whatever you want, but you cannot tell matter to do whatever you want. You need to use software for that. So all these principles and things that were developed because you needed to have a circuit, you know, a little piece of hardware that you would put it there that would do whatever you needed for you. And then you had like, what started happening is that you had a set fix of building blocks that component makers were making. You know, there's a very famous, I wish I could get to that video easily. I don't know if it's even possible to get to that video easily. Let me see if I could show you that. I'm gonna try. There is a electronics market in China. It's a specific. Yeah, I think it's Shenzhen, like the one I want to show you. I don't know exactly if this is the video I want to show you, but I this is kind of like Novi Cheryomovsky or something. I don't know. Yeah, or whatever. But no, I mean, what I want to show you is way much more extreme than that. I guess that I'm not going to get it in this video. I don't know how I even... It was in a cool documentary I once saw that I would love to share with you because it's really great, but whatever. Imagine, it's a place where you can buy... You see, it's kind of like this. Like, you can buy... It's not like we're a place where you buy a phone. It's more the place where you buy, like, you see, like, the pieces that go into your computer. Yeah. Like something like this, potentiometers, and then like, I don't know, whatever, low frequency oscillators, they will be sold there, LEDs, you know. It's the place where you buy the micro components to make something. And so, I mean, when you were a synth designer in the 60s or the 70s, I mean, there was obviously not a market like this. It was a lot more complicated, and parts were really kind of standardized, and then with those standardized parts you could you could sort of build something after that. So we need to get out of this software mentality, which is like, oh, but I can just write a code from it. No, you couldn't. I mean, you just had to find the actual thing. So synthesizers are usually played with keyboards, obviously controlled by sequencers, software or other instruments, or via MIDI, which we'll explore later. So I have this question like, is the mind capable of infinity? Do you think the mind is capable of infinity?
Like in the movie Lucy with Scarlett Johansson. She turned to the giant computer and then the black hole.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think? Do you think the mind can produce infinity? No? You say no. You think no? Okay, I'm gonna say something. Hippopotamus. How is your hippopotamus? How does it look like?
Small gland like this.
Okay, it's small. That? Yeah, it's like the size of a hand, the size of a pea. How is your hippopotamus?
Hippopotamus.
Yeah, just I just said the word hippopotamus. How does your hippopotamus looks like? I mean, mine is carrying a skateboard. It has a cap put on the back, and it's wearing shorts, and it has a Metallica Ride the Lightning shirt.
Mine is like friendly.
Yours is friendly.
Yeah.
How is your hippopotamus?
Hippopotamus.
I mean, what color is it? Does it have shoes? Your hippopotamus, does it have shoes? No? Is it playing a piano? No? Is it riding a bike? So, I mean, are we capable of infinity? How far can this go? I mean, huh? It is a boy. It's a boy hippopotamus. Only boys. Only boy hippopotamus. Okay, хорошо. And you get my point. I mean, I obviously argue that, yeah, that you, I mean, I disagree with you.
Just watch, look at this on the other side. Like, yeah, I can imagine anything, but in the world, collecting stuff, and then replay.
Look, like,
Ooh, yeah, it's like that's
It's not so.
okay, look,
Do you know that the only faces we see when we dream are faces of people we actually saw
I guess.
sometimes in life? So even imagination has some limits on it.
Because, I mean, I guess that a big number is not the same as infinity, right? Like, I mean, a very large number is not the same as infinity.
Yes.
But for example, think about this. Like, I mean, I don't wanna argue that we can produce infinity. But I mean, what I wanna argue is that the numbers that of the things that we can imagine are so large that, for the intensive purposes of our,
It's still different.
you're right. You're right.
It's a giant number that I can't even
Comprehend.
Yeah.
It's not the same. It's not the same. I agree with you. I agree with you. But I mean, it's kind of like we're close there, right? I mean, we have like almost a limitless potential of things we can think of. Like, look at this idea. Like, if you want to count to the number 1 billion, you need 80 years. If you spend 8 hours a day counting without pauses, without even taking a break, you know, you need it's something like, I think it's 80 years. And if every number takes you a second to say it, and I mean, when you go to the number 700,985, that takes you longer than 1 second to say it. So, I mean, and then the universe, like, I mean, that's a 1 billion, right? And then there are 100 trillion. Let me check that number of galaxies. Wait, a number of galaxies. It's 100 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, but
If you're counting like all the time without breaks and dividing
Yeah.
by hours by 24,
you got it.
we get a new total of 11,574 days, 1 hour, 46 minutes, and 40 seconds.
That's kind of 40 years or something, if I'm not mistaken. That's kind of 40 years.
It would take decades.
Yeah, it would take a lot of time. So how many galaxies? I mean, if I'm not mistaken, my number was 100 trillion, but I just want to check that because if you see it there, I just sometimes get lost. Like, total amount. No, I don't want a list. I just want to know how many galaxies are there in the universe. 200 billion. So, I mean, if you just were going to count the amount of galaxies in that we have mapped in the universe, you will need, if you're just gonna count them, you will need, we said, like, how long it takes to count to a billion, how long it takes to count to a billion. So we said how much it takes, how it will take you to count to 1 billion. 31 years it takes you to count 1 billion, kind of. So if you want to count 200 billion, you need 600 years. So if you want to just count the number of galaxies, you would have to start, imagine, in the year 1900, sorry, 1900 and 1400. You would need to start in the 15th century if you just want to count the number of galaxies in the universe, you would have had to start in the 15th century. So, okay, this is like super long way of saying that. That yeah, I mean, definitely we can achieve a very large amount of numbers complexity. And the same with synths. I mean, in principle, synths can create unique sounds, you know, just like your hippopotamus is unique. And that's that's not why the synths were created, but that's the fishka of synths, you know. You will see why the synths were created in a minute, but the fishka is that they can produce almost an infinite amount of sounds. And
Maybe it's why people were interested in creating.
you will see it's not exactly like that. Let me get there. We're gonna get there in a second. But in synths were created to imitate real sounds, really. Like, I mean, it's really interesting. Like, they were like, oh, let's make something that can replace an orchestra, because, I mean, the concept was like, man, like moving a whole orchestra is a really bit of a difficult thing, you know. I mean, imagine like you are a 19th century inventor, you know, and you're like trying to fix humanity's problems, and you're like, wouldn't it be nice that people can hear music at their home without having to bring a whole orchestra to perform in front of them? Because, I mean, we are used to having recordings, but recordings are a super new phenomenon. Like, if you plot the history of humanity, you know, you have like 150,000 years without recording, and then you have like 80 years with recording. It's crazy. I mean, it's a super new thing. And the experience of music before was a very rare thing. So one of the reasons why synths were kind of, people started thinking about synths was like, how can I get a music apparatus that people can hear without having to put a full orchestra there? Kind of like the proto Spotify or something. So let's go. So the early days of synths, it starts with, I mean, obviously to make a synthesizer, you need something kind of like electricity in order to make it work, because you're going to have to manipulate electrical signals, and without electricity, you can manipulate electrical signals. So until we don't have electricity, we cannot think about synths. There are some prior, you know, instruments or things that could be seen as a synth. The oldest that I know, I don't think that I put it in this presentation. The oldest thing that could be considered like a synth, I also put it in one of the slides that we discussed in the past, but this was like a Persian wind instrument. Wait, let me see if we get there. I don't know, I forgot the name right now. Nah, I'm not gonna get there easily. Old. Let me just write the word old and also get out of Yandex, because it sucks as a search engine.
Isn't like Iran?
Yeah.
You're writing it wrong.
Yeah, I'll fix it. Yeah, just a moment. Let me just get out of here. Google will correct me there. There is like a, yeah, I'm not gonna find it right now. It was kind of like a whole house kind of thing. I just forgot the name. I can get it. Maybe it's this name. No. I'll show you later. It was like a set of imagine like when we take a break. I'll pull it up. Imagine like a set of, like, imagine a building that has a set of compartments and corridors where you can send air to, and depending of where you were doing that, the sound that the whole building was going to produce was going to be not building, but more like a little structure. It was going to be different. So that would be like the most proto-synthy thing that you can think of. But no, without electricity, you really couldn't do what we're used to think about when we think about synths. So there's a guy called Elisha Gray who realized that you can control sound with a vibrating electromagnetic circuit. So what I just did with automation, is what an electromagnetic circuit that will variate a lot. It's basically an LFO. So he realized that, I mean, if you run electrical signal through a certain component, it will vibrate, and then you could just like control at what speed that thing vibrates, and then have a pitch. And around 1905, like, this idea was developed, and around 1901, there is a thing that was installed in the New York Metropolitan Opera House. It's kind of like a grade as the first synth in a way, that was called the telharmonium. So, like, if we're going to talk about also synths, of course, we need to talk about the theremin, you know, who was designed by our bratan Lev Sergeyevich Teremian. So you have seen how it works. I mean, it's just like uses the principle of antennas, you know, and proximity, and the electrical magnetic field both of humans and the material, the metal, to create physical sound out of physical motions. And then there is a person called Lawrence Hammond who invented the electrical Hammond organ that came in production in 1937. That's a really important piece of gear. And it was like, there was like a metal rotating thing that, I mean, it's kind of like, ooh, 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 ooh. Like, you know, sometimes when you get something close to a speaker, you hear maybe like a ooh, ooh. So imagine, the principle would be, imagine that you have something that rotates so far that it creates a pitch, like ee, ooh, ah, ee. And depending on which note you're playing, like things will rotate faster. So the device generated a sound creating an electromagnetic current from rotating metal, and then there was an amplifier. So this is the teleharmonium. Like, it was this house. I mean, it was all like a whole kind of like building, and it was an electrical organ developed by this guy, Tadeusz Cahill, and it produced electricity through a large set of motors. So it has like its own generators. It converted music into sound via telephone receivers. So it was kind of using the principle of telephony too. And there were also these like spinning tone wheels that were creating an electromagnetic field. And the teleharmonium was shut down because it could hear the transmissions of the American Navy like around New York, and the army came like, dude, like you have to shut this off. Like, I mean, everybody can hear what we're saying, and in the center of New York. So, and then kind of the vacuum tube came, which we discussed already in earlier lectures. So, I mean, this capacity of amplifying things and also manipulating signals through diodes, triodes, and pentodes and tetrodes gave us like a new, you know, capacity of doing things, and also like, I mean, gave us the capacity to move signals from alternate current to direct current, and this was really important. And so thanks to the invention of the vacuum tube, then a lot of electronic music instruments were started to be developed. Electrical pianos, harmonics, and all of these like were the center of the electronic music scene of the early 20th century. But around the 50s is when we start seeing things that look like what we know as a synth today, because World War II flooded the world with bombs and electrical components. And this started become like a, I mean, you see, like, I showed you that market in China where you could just go and pick up, like, without that marketplace of electrical components, you couldn't really do much, you know, like, I mean, I want to make a synth. Okay, how are you going to make it? Like, I mean, I'm some guy living in whatever, in Rostov, and I want to make a synth. It's like, okay, I mean, I'm talking about the 50s. It's like, okay, so good luck. I mean, where are you going to find a potentiometer? Like, so there was a chicken egg situation. No components, no synths. Components, synths, great. Now we have synths. So around the 20th century, you know, these things became more, I mean, there were these developments initially. The Hammond, we already mentioned it. And then we have to talk about, like around the 50s, there is a guy called Harry Olson who make the RCA Mark II sound synthesizer. So in Princeton, New Jersey, which is still there, by the way. This I really love to go and visit it. It's like kind of one of the first sort of synths that had some sort of programmability into it, and it was working with punching cards. You know, I don't know if you have seen what a punching card is, but it looks like this. Punching card, RCA synth. I guess that there's going to be an image. Oh man, Yandex is so crappy, really. Like, I'm well, I don't know. Again, maybe for Russian search is good, but yeah, like that's exactly. I mean, what a different result I just got. Like, this is the one. It's exactly this one. I think I have a photo there, but it was kind of like. I mean, if we could see the paper, yeah, it kind of like looks like this. Like, so these are kind of like 0011 0011. I mean, it's a metaphoric, not a metaphoric, but like an analog expression of like digital. I think there is, and if I'm not mistaken, I do have a video of it. Yes, I do have a video of it. So that was, and this thing, imagine, it had 750 vacuum tubes, like to get it running. Lampa, you know.
So it amplifies.
Yes, like, I mean, we discussed this in previous lectures, but I'll give you like the TLDR of it. What's happening inside a tube like this is that there is, let me put it like this. There is an input signal, and then the signal travels across this vacuum tube, and then there is an output point. Like imagine that right now. Imagine it like this. Imagine that. Look at. I'm gonna make a metaphor here. Imagine that there is an input and an output here, and so the signal it's blasted into a tube and it enters into here, and then this little cable catches it on the way out, and it goes through. But how does it amplifies? There is a shower of electrons running through here, and so the waveform eats those electrons and grows fatter. But for example, if you send those electrons at a certain speed, like you don't send them continuously, you can modulate the signal too. You see? So vacuum tubes were really useful to start developing something like that. So here is the RCA Mark II, and here's the video that I mean we're gonna find it. This is YouTube account. Okay, this YouTube account was terminated, but this is gonna be easy to find. This was a piece by a composer called Milton Babbitt. It's gonna be really easy to find, and I'll re-put it there. Yeah, with the punching cards. Like yeah, that's how crappy we are. Yeah. I mean that we're so like, oh no, I cannot even make a song. It's like, okay, Milton Babbitt just made this with a punching card. I think it's this one, yeah. You see, new electronic music. Thanks. Anyways, I want to put it in the presentation. And this was the artwork of. I mean, you see, like these things have like a very big philosophical background to them, because I mean we're taking a lot of things for granted nowadays in this era, you know. And the relationship with machines is not something that we have kind of sorted out at all, and that it started very recently. I mean, look at that artwork. You know, it's kind of like pieces of human, pieces of machine, and you will feel a lot of desperation in this composition. You know, or I wouldn't like to call it desperation, but let's hear it a bit and piece it apart just for a couple of seconds. Let me just maybe move a bit. There is a technical limitation of what you can do with a device like this, right? But so this is kind of like 1950s house music or something, or techno.
Here on the background of some sort of art show.
Yeah, sure. Also, there was no point of reference, you know, like what can. Now it sounds like guns or something. Yeah. I mean, there's no like so like we will explore next year. I just realized that, I mean, because next year I have so much freedom to build the bachelor's how I want, that I think that everybody is going to have to see the philosophy course. I think it's not going to be optional. I mean, I don't think I'm going to. Yeah, it's a great thing, and we will explore the philosophy course, and we will see how we got to postmodernity, and how, I mean, we come from very concrete musical ideas to very abstract musical ideas, but that's another story. What I want to talk to you about is about, this is on the other side of the river of our relationship with technology. Have you seen the movie Her? With, yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, with Joaquin Phoenix, and I don't know who makes the voice of the girl. I don't remember right now, but it's about this device, you know, who is like the person falls in love with this like artificial intelligence device.
But just like you said, you have a horrible relationship
With movies, right?
culture. I have
Yeah.
different things. Like I watch so much that I don't even think
Well, that's not cool. You have to sort that out. But anyways, the point is that this is in the other spectrum, on the side of the river of our relationship with technology. And back here, I mean, you can feel this like, I don't know, like alienation. You know this word? Separation, division between the person and the technology. And yeah, I could talk for hours about that, but that's why I made a philosophy course. So let's just do it like that. And you will have to do both. We will do philosophical OVJ. So here you got the device, how it looked like, kind of, and how you could program it, and this is a piece run by that. So then we arrive to the 60s. We have a lot of cool things to show you. I have a lot of cool things to show you. Take a break? Yeah, sure. Take a break. So it's 12. It's a good time for a break. Breakcito. So let's do this. I'm gonna go here and switch this off. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Let's hear my synth meanwhile. Oh, my synth go broken. Look at it. It looks really cool here. No. I don't know why my synth is broken now. But anyways. Yeah, you go away, you come back, and then it doesn't work, right? God damn it. Hey, okay, now we're right to the 60s. And so there is a German engineer called Harald Bode, which made several electronic organs, and things started developing a lot in Germany in the 60s. After World War II, there were a lot of components around because the Germans were making a lot of electronic devices, and so... So this guy, Harald Bode, is important because he was the first one who was like, hey guys, what if we make these components to be able to be connected with each other? Just like, not, it's all like hard, like made inside of the synthesizer, how it was. Like there is a potential here if I can just like decide what I'm going to do with this filter. Am I going to send it to that oscillator or to that oscillator? So the concept of modular synthesizer starts appearing. And what does it modular means? It's like imagine right now my vocals are going through a specific sound card and it's all like already decided like that, but what if I can just connect a cable from here and send that sound card to another place? That output of my vocals to another place, and then grab the output of my vocals in that second effect unit and send it to another place. So you get the point. I mean, modular means that I can connect things together and just sort of create different solutions with the same gear. So then there was a guy who was making thereminds. Actually, his name is Robert Moog, and you have heard this Moog a lot. So he was actually a theremin designer, and he partnered with a guy called Herbert Deutsch, which was a composer, and they made the first popular kind of like modular synthesizer, which was called the Moog Modular Synth, which is this huge thing that you have seen sometimes, that it looks like a wall. You know, you will see a lot of it now. We're going to hear some stuff of it. And the pioneering thing that he had there, he was like, what if we add a keyboard? And he was like, holy shit, like that's a great idea. I mean, no punching cards. Let's just like make it more musical interface. And this also made it more marketable too. And so this is the arrival of Robert Moog to the scene is what took us to the synth era of music. And we owe a lot to him. So the Moog Modular, like, I mean, was like a huge thing, and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were the synths, you know, were carrying the synths, and sometimes we're even taking it to shows and stuff like that. But it was a really huge device, and it was really heavy and hard to carry and expensive and difficult to move. And that was like, I mean, it was somewhere like an obscure thing there, standing on the sides of music, until a person called Wendy Carlos in 1968 made an album called Switch on Bach, that it's really one of the most important albums on electronic music history. And she grabbed like classic music of Bach and just performed it with a Moog synthesizer. And it is maybe the best-selling classical music album in history, something like that, of one of the. And so this popularized the synth a lot. So you're gonna see now Wendy Carlos. This is the Switch on Bach. It's amazing. So, I mean, we're going to see her speaking in a second. So, well, when there was a he in a point and then a she in a point, so just so you don't get confused, it's the same person. So, I don't remember the name. I mean, she was born a man, and then I remember like Walter Carlos was his male identity, and then she transitioned, and she's still alive, by the way. So this is Wendy Carlos, or in that moment Walter, explaining the like how to use the Moog synth and what you could do with it.
First of all, none of them exist as a particular sound as they would on an electronic organ. There's no magic button marked trumpet or violin or drums. You have to build every sound. And to start to build these sounds, you have to start with something pretty simple. And here are the simple things we start with. There are 5 of them.
So I mean, when I said modular, what I meant is like now all these components have like an output, and it's just, it looks complicated, but it's exactly the same thing you do in Ableton. It's just like Ableton kind of, it's hiding this routing for you, but whenever you send something to a bus, like you're connecting a little cable, digital cable from like your track to somewhere else, and then routing it somewhere or some other place.
The simplest one of all is something that any lab technician must have seen at one time or another. It's called a sine wave. It's very smooth, very flute-like. A little bit more more complicated wave is called sawtooth. And it's called sawtooth because on an oscilloscope screen it looks just like a sawtooth.
So, okay, look. Important moment here. Like, there is a little thing that you can buy who is a sine tone generator. And then you connect this, like imagine, like you grab a sine tone generator. So it's something that when you input electricity to it, it's going to grab this electricity and kind of bend it until what comes out is a sine tone. And then you can also buy a sawtooth generator, like a little component like that. And you can also buy a square wave generator. Like those sawtooths and waves, square waves generators are a lot of, not a lot, but like a special wiring of a sine tone generator. Like the basic building block of it, the hydrogen of the whole thing, is the sine tone generator. I showed you before, this is what a sawtooth sound like. Bzzz, and then it was split into several sine tones. So you know now that if you have a sine tone generator, then you can build all the complexity that you want, because then you're just going to wire them different, so they become like, I mean, you kind of package them like, okay, this is a sawtooth generator, which is a whole bunch of sine tone generators. This is a square wave generator, which is a whole bunch of sine tone generators. So, and then we go to this piece of gear for the first time. So it's like, oh, look, what is this? Well, it's like kind of like it's like I'm making a choice, which is like what circuit I want to use. You know, I want to use the circuit that it's like produces a square wave. Okay, so the system inside of this synth is kind of like routing the signal. The electricity is like electricity was going to the sine tone generator. Now electricity is going to go to the square wave generator. And there's going to be an individual component in there that is a square wave generator. And you can go to that market in China and just like, hey, a square wave. And then you can get your square wave generator there. So now she's plugging the system through the sawtooth generator, right?
And it resembles a lot of sounds found on home electronic organs. Something in between those last two, and a very useful sound indeed, is something called triangular, and it's kind of a
Yeah.
sine wave. So you can see it's a little brighter than a sine wave. This one's called pulse wave, and I'm just going to show you how it swings into a thing called square wave. It's up, down, just like a switch. If you flip a switch, you're making a pulse wave. If it's an even off, on, then it looks on an oscilloscope very symmetrical, and it's called a square wave. And if I take the time that it's on and make it different from the time that it's off, it changes quality. Listen to it.
A square wave is just an on and off switch, really. Like, and then how long it's on or off, it's going to be the width of the pulse. We're going to see this all together.
It's a very useful sound. The last of which is probably the least useful, although you'd never want to be without it. It's very colorful, very coloristic. In its pure form, it sounds like surf or steam sound. It's called white noise. Now I'll patch this up here into one of my output modules, and try and show you how with these primitive sounds we start to get some very musical sounding things. First of all, here's a sawtooth wave that's coming out of an oscillator, going into a mixer.
So an oscillator will be one of those devices that you can buy in China, in that market, and then you will choose. That's what I'm telling you, though. Like a sawtooth generator, that's an oscillator. Like, and then now that I told you this, and I'm really aware that you saw these things with Anatoly, I just have a bit of a more, I don't know, like historical perspective. That's why I like to sometimes repeat it. Now you're going to start seeing that you're going to see that word everywhere. It's like, oh shit, look, like there is an oscillator 1 and there is an oscillator 2. So I have two oscillators there. What kind of oscillators? Well, they can be a sine tone, square wave, or triangle. How do you get that? You go to China, get that component and put it in here. Or you go to Novichiromsky, whatever. I don't know where you can find these in Moscow, but I'm sure you can. And then you can build your own synths. Oh, sorry, I lost our place there. So I guess that we were around here. Yeah, it's just gonna obviously start creating new sounds and filtering them. So there's a cutoff filter there.
Turn that around and make it open up instead of closing. It does this. Which was quite a surprise when I first heard it.
Yeah, well, obviously she's gonna just be modulating signals there. And by the way, guys, that synth is a monophonic synth. So everything that you hear there of Bach, it means that she played like each one of the parts. I mean, she was like going to the tape machine and recording, like, I don't know, pa 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 da, pa pa, and then going and playing the second voice, and then the third voice, and then the 10th, and then 100th voice. I don't know. So and with a tape machine, right? Like.
All the other components of this score, and I'll add in the solo.
So she's hearing, yeah, like, I mean, every one of those things was performed individually, right? Like, it's monophonic. So a bit more on Wendy Carlos here.
To recreate music from its component parts.
Go.
The development of modern electronics made it possible to recreate music from its component parts, its tones.
Well, you're looking at one of the very first 8-track machines. We used it to switch down Bach, low-tempered synthesizer, right through a good half of Clockwork Orange.
Ah, by the way, she's the composer of the Clockwork Orange soundtrack, by the way. Yeah.
Wendy Carlos in her
And so many other things, I mean.
is
She's
one of the pioneers of synthesized sound. Her controversial versions of the classics created
controversial. You see, like, it was like, oh, like she did like I mean, the controversial because it was like Bach played on synths. It was like, oh, wow, like how you're ruining Bach or something like.
electronically, put machine-made music on.
Right now, we're listening to the 8-track, and we're mixing, sort of playing the role of the conductor, putting together, in this case, a pair of tracks which has all of the string section. It sounds like this. There's a harpsichord track, and 2 flutes. And there's this nice solo that's split up into 2 tracks. Let's put them all together. If it needs a little more echo.
Some pretty serious music production there.
Yeah, that's good.
Her early work was with a Moog synthesizer. Though it's a museum piece now, when it was first introduced, it opened the door to a world of music synthesis. It works by first generating these harsh, bright sounds, made up of many pure tones played together.
We would pass these bright waves into a filter, which in this case,
tell you that there's no,
I said it. Video streaming?
yeah, there's no video in the,
Fuck.
yeah.
That's terrible. Sorry. Thank you, Gleb. Yeah, that's terrible. I guess that I need to check more often. Yeah.
generally, like your tone controls on a hi-fi set, remove portions or boost portions of the sound. We can make it sound very dull, quite pure.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna like bore us with these details. We know some of this stuff. Let's move a bit around.
With little control, its sounds were crude. Soon, it was overtaken by a second revolution, controlling individual tones by computer.
Unlike the Moog synthesizer, we're not going to be taking away, tearing down bits of a very bright wave. Instead, we're going to put together little overtones, pieces of sound.
So this is a difference between subtractive synthesis, talking about subtractive synthesis and additive synthesis.
Little overtones, pieces of sound.
So let's see.
The Moog was revolutionary, but as it generated many tones together with little control, its sounds were crude. Soon, it was overtaken by a second revolution, controlling individual tones by computer.
Unlike the Moog synthesizer, we're not going to be taking away, tearing down bits of a very bright wave. Instead, we're going to put together little overtones, pieces of sounds, characteristic of all sounds, and assemble them additively rather than subtracting parts that we don't want.
By adding tones, one at a time, Wendy Carlos is able to build precisely the sound she wants. This is the beginnings of a xylophone.
Now, obviously, if we want to make it sound like a xylophone, we're going to have to make it speak more quickly. So I'll shorten the attack from being about a half a second. There. Now it's getting on almost instantaneously, but it's lasting too long. me drop that down a bit. Ah, this is much more like a xylophone. Well, that one sounds pretty good. So I'll take that pattern and play a simple music phrase.
Now she specifies 3 more pure tones.
So she's adding other oscillators there.
Produces.
I'll put in all 4 of
And then
them.
all the 4 components, and it sounds like a xylophone, right? Like,
Now, this is something that's very close to being a replica of a xylophone, but there's an element that's missing, and that is the hammer noise that you get with a real instrument when the mallet impacts against the wood.
so I mean, imagine like not imagine, but the synthesizing something really requires you to visualize it and think about it. Like, what are the components of that in real life?
For this final touch, she adds an electronic shake to each sound component.
Shake. So we moved to the 70s. This was like the recreation of the 70s in a Gifka. So, okay, something really important happens in the 70s, which is that the Minimoog Model D was released. So this was like the first time a synthesizer was kind of like shrunk into something that can be taken on tour easily or something like that. That was obviously made a big revolution, because I mean, now you could just play this and then you start recognizing them. Just like, for example, when I hear a recording, I'm like, that's a Fender Telecaster. Like you will know the tones of these things, and you get used to the tones of those things, and that also helps you to articulate better your ideas. Because I mean, the point of this section of our course is that you guys go away from presets and you start seeing like what Wendy Carlos was seeing there. She was like, oh, I want a xylophone, so I obviously need a type of oscillator that looks like that, blah, blah, blah. And then that also applies to the types of synths. So we will analyze a lot, and one of the synths we will analyze is the ARP 2600. So, well, this was like a monophonic synth that had a very modular patching, and so this was really important development, in the 70s, the ARP 2600. So obviously we are in this like moment in which we talk for a second about monophonic synths versus polyphonic synths, because until the 70s all the synths were monophonic, and so it means that they cannot play 2 notes at once. They can only play 1 note at once. So, and then polyphonic synths, obviously synths that can play many notes at the same time. So now when you're back to Ableton and you're seeing, every time you see the word poly or mono, I don't know if this particular synth is going to have that particularity, but every time you come here, you will find out that every time you see that word, monophonic, I don't know where it is here. I'm sure that there is this option to make it monophonic or polyphonic, but anyways, you get the point there. That, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. And that's the Minimoog Model D, by the way. Like, I mean, pretty portable thing. We still use this guy pretty much till now. Behringer made a copy of it, that it kind of made it accessible, because I mean, to buy one of these, they still make them new, Moog. It will cost like $1,300 or something, like, to buy one. I mean, there is a synth called the Moog One that it's kind of like $1,000,000 rubles or something. It's really great synth, very powerful. But Behringer made a clone of this, and they are quite affordable and it's cool. So this is kind of how they look when you open them up and work them out. And well, Mini Moog, yeah, the little Moog, and so, and I mean, this is actually the circuitry of I mean, I put it here for your like general consideration. I mean, this is a circuitry. Next year, I mean, you will study audio electronics pretty much, and those of you who continue in the bachelor's, and you will understand many of these components and what they mean. But this is kind of like an analog synth and signal journeys around, those paths, and create new waveforms by electronic synthesis. So hey, let's kind of get to know Robert Moog. He's kind of like an important dude in our story. Mini Moog.
It's 1971, the year of the first microprocessor, the year Walt Disney World opens for business, and the year Alan Shepard played golf on the moon. But it was also a time when humble engineers conversed with musicians who were at the forefront of technology. These two very different groups of people were speaking of the future, and by 1971, the sound of the future was largely created by one instrument, the Mini Moog. Hello, you don't know who I am, and really, why would that matter when I'm surrounded by such elegant machines such as these? And it was the predecessor of these machines, the Mini Moog Model D, that changed the face of popular music around the world. Suddenly, the Mini Moog seemed to be everywhere. It was quickly embraced by the gods of the new progressive rock, where fantastic imagery and futuristic sounds were the order of the day. But the Mini Moog wasn't only the domain of
The cape.
rockers and flowing capes. It was also represented in every major musical genre of the decade. Jazz heavies like Chick Corea used the Mini Moog to invent a new method of soloing, bending notes courtesy of the pitch wheel, a radical new controller design that set the instrument apart in the eyes of performers. And Kraftwerk, that legendary German band of electronic pioneers, used the Mini Moog to craft their vision of tomorrow. Their groundbreaking 1974 single Autobahn laid down the foundations for all electronic pop that followed. But it wasn't just musicians who were interested in the future that turned to the Mini Moog for its sound. Reggae superstar Bob Marley brought the Mini Moog to his flavor of roots music when the band first turned up in the UK to perform on the BBC.
Man, I love Bob Marley so much, like really.
And as the decade drew to a close, rock futurists such as Gary Newman opted to feature the Mini Moog and synthesizers like it while stepping completely away from organic instruments entirely. Before it made its way to the stage, however, the Mini Moog found its origins here. On a small main street in the sleepy town of Trumansburg, New York, the future of music was being soldered together one circuit at a time. R.A. Moog Incorporated began as a cottage industry that made guitar amplifiers and an odd electronic instrument that you didn't even have to touch to play, called the theremin. But as pop culture came to a boil in the mid-60s, so did the ideas in the head of one Dr. Robert A. Moog. By the end of the decade, his name would be known the world over because of a new modular instrument that he and his tiny workforce created on modest wooden tables and benches, the synthesizer. The Mini Moog was smaller and infinitely more portable than the groundbreaking modular systems that had made Dr. Robert Moog's name synonymous with synthesizers. The idea? To create a device that would take the sonic power of the mammoth Moog synthesizers and put it in the hands of keyboard players everywhere. And one of those men who was there alongside Bob Moog when this magnificent instrument was born was Bill Hemsath, one of Moog Music's earliest engineers. Out of spare parts lying around his attic office, Hemsath assembled the first Mini Moog prototype during his lunch breaks, the Model A.
Nice.
I'd open my desk drawers, take an apple out of one and take a module out of the other. Now, my office was up on the second floor, and I was next to the graveyard, and that's where Bob tossed stuff that was junk, but maybe we could use it someday. There was a 5-octave keyboard, but he would steal keycaps off of the treble end for, replace chipped and broken ones. The number of remaining keycaps determined the size of the keyboard, and it turned out to be 3 octaves. So I hacksawed that down, and there was just a little bitty notch left in the left cheek. And I needed something there. Well, how about a slide pot? That would fit. So, the forerunner of the wheel was that slide pot, just to fill in the space in the left cheek. And then there was an upper console case, 4 feet long, but the end was broken out. I would take the upper console, cut it down to match, and with a little bit of fudging, it fit. I could get how many modules was that? About a half a dozen across. I was able to find everything in the junk except for the 901, a oscillator controller. I had to steal that from the stock room and bolted them together. This was the first time in history that a keyboard was bolted to a
Oscillator.
Over
Yeah.
the next 2 years, 3 more prototypes were made and a number of futuristic designs were considered. But in the end, a simple wooden case cut from walnut boards was deemed to be the perfect presentation
Nice.
for this
It's perfect. It's so
revolutionary
beautiful.
instrument. From its inception, when musicians speak of the Minimoog, the talk is about its unique sonic characteristics. As Bill Hemsath tells it, that sound was partially the result of a minor miscalculation on the part of one of his colleagues.
Our instrument had punch to it because we inadvertently overdrove the filter like crazy. Jim Scott did the filter and the voltage controlled amplifiers. He made a calculation error and he overdrove the filters by 10, 12, 15 dB, something like that. And nobody knew that until a month or two after we started in production, and everybody said, leave it alone. Yes. The other one is that back in, this is 1970 roughly, integrated circuits were horrible. You don't put audio through one of those rotten integrated circuits in those days. And so I purposely kept the whole audio path, discrete transistors, and lovely, lovely sound. So it's the overdrive and the use of discrete transistors throughout the whole shebang. Nowadays we have good audio integrated circuits, but not back then.
It was those slight deviations that gave the Minimoog its characteristic sound and caught the imaginations of musicians the world over. At the time, no one knew...
So cool. And this is Robert Moog himself.
Father of the modern synthesizer.
Ah, by the way, that image here, that's inside the teleharmonium. These are telephone cables, like the first instrument we discussed. Like these are telephone cables that were moving the signal, and these are the power generators that were generating the electricity for the teleharmonium.
The father of the modern synthesizer is undoubtedly Dr. Bob Moog. The Moog modular synthesizer first became widely heard in 1968.
That's the switch on back.
Called Switched On Back by Walter, now Wendy, Carlos.
Sex change.
It was big brother to the best
It's very stupid though.
synthesizer of all time, the Minimoog.
This is the last off the production line. It was made in 1980. The last of about 12,000 that were made between 1970 and 1980. It's an analog monophonic synthesizer. That means it makes the waveforms by electronic means and it plays one note at a time. In an analog synthesizer like this, we start out with an oscillator. An oscillator produces a steady pitch sound. And in this synthesizer, we can control the oscillator sound from either the keyboard, from a pitch wheel, or automatically through modulation. The oscillator has a waveform, and that determines the harmonics. Here's a triangular wave, sawtooth, square, and 2 rectangular waveforms. With all those harmonics, we can shape the sound through filtering. That is, we can cut out these harmonics as the sound goes on. Here's a filter which cuts out the harmonics starting with the highest.
Just an EQ, right?
Another important aspect of the sound is its envelope, how it builds up and decays as it goes on. In an analog synthesizer like this, there are 4 parts to the envelope. The attack, which is the rise, the decay, which is the fall from the highest point, the sustain, which is how loud it is as it continues, and then the release, which is how rapidly it dies to 0 when you let go of the key. Here now I have a slow attack and slow decay and fairly low sustain, so you can hear each individual part. First the attack, then the decay, then the sustain, and finally I let go of the key, the release.
Yeah, that's Robert Moog himself talking to us about synths. And well, I mean, and we reached finally to our kind of like, I mean, this discussion about the design that Robert Moog made and how this affected the future of synths. So, I mean, whenever you're gonna find a synth in your life, you're going to find something that is really similar to each other and follows the same principles. So in the particular Robert Moog design, the signal flow, it's kind of conceived from left to right. So when you're looking at a synth like this, you're thinking that the whole movement is sort of kind of like that, ending in the output, right? So you're going to have here, if you read the text that actually synths write you there, you're going to learn a lot about them. So you first have global parameters, which is going to be the general tuning of the synth, because synths are just able to play anything. They're not like, 12, what's the name? Equal tempered machines that are set to the notes that we use as a standard. So you can tune them however you want. And then we're going to talk about that thing more in a bit. And then you have like the oscillator section, So in here, how many oscillators do you have here? 3. Do you guys see it too, or you see it? Very obvious? Yeah. So what can I do with these oscillators? What do you think I can do? I can change the waveform where? Like, I can change the waveform.
Then you can adjust the pitch.
That's the pitch of each oscillator. I mean, here is more the octave range where you are going to be standing. Like, and those octave ranges, by the way, those numbers, I mentioned this last week, but I don't know if you remember, those numbers came from the pipes of the organs, like in the church. So when you see like 12 inch, 32 inch, it's like depending on how big the pipe of the organ of the church was. So you can choose your octave range, and then once you're in your octave range, you can choose like how you're going to fine tune that, and then you can choose the character of it. And then you have here, let's hold Sebastian for 1 second to see the ladies, how are we about this? Like, do you know what this knob will do? You have any idea? So up there it says volume. So up there it says volume, and what is the meaning of that? That what you have here is like an oscillator 1, and then I can choose how much of that oscillator 1 I'm going to be using. It's like a mixer, literally. It's literally just a mixer. So oscillator 1, 2, 3. How much of oscillator 1? If you turn this to 0, then you will have 0 volume of that oscillator. And then you can see it as a mute button. The next on, you see like there it says on. You can just switch them on or off if you want to. And then, I cannot read here. We're going to explore the Minimoog. I will install my Arturia synths here, and I'll show you this particular Minimoog. Right now, I don't remember because I cannot read. I don't remember exactly what is there. Yeah, maybe it's white noise. This is white and pink noise. And this is how much white and pink noise. So it's like you see, it's kind of like a fourth oscillator in a way, because it's sort of like white noise oscillator or generator. And in here, this is, if I'm not mistaken, you can feed the output to itself and then make like a feedback loop in order to make like distortion, to achieve distortion. And this is going to be for that. And then you're going to have here 2 segments, So basically, these 2 segments, like this is a filter. It's literally like an EQ. When you see cutoff, it's literally an EQ filter. That's why these white lines are kind of like pointing towards it. It's receiving all the signals and just like filtering if you want. And that filter has, when you make a low cut, have you ever noticed that sometimes when you make a low cut or a high cut, you get something like this? Let me show you this on Ableton. Sometimes when you drop an EQ, here, audio effects, EQ 8, like if I drop here any EQ, it doesn't matter. If I do this, sometimes you get something like this. So that's called a resonance. So now let's just simulate the cutoff here. Let me just add a new operator. Add the EQ8, add an operator. And then, like, the cutoff will be something like this, right? Let me make a bit of more rich waveform. So look, the same principle is it's happening here. Oscillator, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is an on and off button for the oscillator. And then I can switch on oscillator 1. And then I can choose the waveform that it has, right? So this was a sine wave, so let's change it to a sawtooth. And then I can also work around. Let me see here, decay, release. I'm gonna use a saw 3. So, I forgot that. I'm kind of like cutting it here. So I'm changing the waveform, right? I can have a square wave, and I can have a sawtooth. Okay, now that's cool. Now imagine that I do this, and then that I move this guy here. I'm gonna turn it down so it doesn't disturb you. Wait. So that thing there, that's a resonance peak. That thing that you're seeing there. And so that's what you can control in here. You see, you have the cutoff frequency, which is going to be the frequency where this whole like high pass, low pass filter is, sorry, in this case is a high pass filter, low pass filter, sorry. And then the filter emphasis will be that peak. And then the contour will be how open that peak is. So it's literally an EQ. It's just like these things are called in a different way, and then we're like, oh, what the hell does contour means? It's just literally like that. And then the output volume. It's just like how much volume I'm going to have. Great. And then I have down here, like, you see, there is a filter, right? Like there is an EQ. Now imagine that I do something like this. I have my EQ here. Let's go back to our synth that we just were making here. And this thing right now, it's off. Like this low pass. Sorry, it's off. And the resonance peak is like this. Now imagine that I do something like this. Let me just do this. Wait, look. And every time I play a note, this thing resets, right? And then I play it again. So that is the attack of the filter. It's how fast it's going to get engaged. If I have a very fast attack on the filter, then it's going to sound like... As soon as I hit the note, imagine that the synth has a clock inside of it. You can see it like that. And it's like he counts time. I play the note. And then the synth is like, okay, user, like how fast do you want this filter to achieve its final configuration? Yeah, or the sweep, you know. So if it's a slow attack, it's going to sound like that. If it's a slow, fast attack, it's going to be just like that. So that's the attack of the filter down here. Like you see, you are inside the module of the filter. And the filter has some modulators. I'm saying this with such care because there is another set of attack, release, and decay down there that is not for the filter. This is only for the filter. That's really important that we get that because this same principle is going to be repeated everywhere. And so it has a sustain and a release and a decay. So then it's going to be how fast it just goes from its maximum effect. So what really ends up happening, it's something kind of like this. It's kind of like... And then it goes to the place that you really want him to sit down. There is an attack moment, then like a decay, and then when you let the note go, let's say that this thing gets slower, and then you can control the decay of the filter. And then you have here the loudness contour. So you can then control some of these parameters from here, basically. You can say the attack of the, or I mean, like the attack, this is really going to be modular. It depends. You're going to be given a choice of what you're going to do with this thing. You can control the attack of the contour. You can control the attack of the filter. You can also control the attack of how fast white noise is going to be activated, something like that. And we're going to see it more clearly when we actually touch this synth and we actually start playing with it. So that design kind of like stuck on and stayed for the decades, and it became something really like iconic that just sort of like determined the shape of synths for the years to come. So what's the time, by the way? It's 1. Well, I mean, we started a bit later. Oh shit, there's a lot of things to carry on. Let me just, maybe let's take it till the 80s. I mean, we just have here a couple of slides, and then we're in the 80s, and then we see what we do, okay? couple of minutes. We're almost there. So by the end of the 70s, like, I mean, then microprocessors were invented, and this allowed us to go into digital things, which we couldn't do before. We only had like wires, cables, and things. And the components became more affordable. Again, that's the main story. And because, I mean, because if you're gonna make the problem of making a polyphonic synth is that, I mean, you see that big tower that was the Mini Moog, you know, like you would have to have 2 towers in order to play 2 notes at the same time. And in order to play 2, like a polyphonic Mini Moog, you will have to double the size of the Mini Moog. But the more small components started becoming and became more affordable, so then you could really make polyphonic synths, and that was really the revolution of the 80s, that the polyphony became cheap. It was not expensive to have a polyphonic synth. So, and a great example of this is a super cool synth that is called the Prophet 5, Sequential Circuits Prophet 5. It was the first programmable polyphonic synthesizer, which I use a lot. I really love it. So as we were saying, like earlier synths were monophonic. Some of them, earliest commercial polyphonic synths were developed by a guy called Tom Oberheim. This is a super cool synth, the OBX. One of my main goals of this module is to introduce you to a lot of synths that you didn't know. It's kind of like introducing you to new guitars and things like that. It's new vocabulary for you. So, because I mean, you know what happens to me a lot? That I'm watching like Netflix or something, and then I'm like, yeah, this is the patch called like, I mean, I'm talking about presets. Like this is the patch called Frozen Eyes. Presets are used by billions of people, and so, or millions, whatever. And it becomes boring. I mean, everybody starts predicting those sounds. You will be a true music producer if you are in the capacity of making your own sounds, obviously. And for this, you need a vocabulary. So the OBX is a really nice synth. I actually will really install all my synths here, I guess, before Thursday, so we can start exploring it more in depth. And yeah, well, I mean, we already sorted about the Prophet. The process, the Prophet was really nice synth. Used really interesting, like, let's say, synthesis procedures inside of it. So yeah, I mean, I don't have so much to talk about. And that's where we arrived to the 80s. And let's just start on the 80s next week. Not next week, sorry, on Thursday, and carry on, okay? And then we will demonstrate. I mean, the main goal, we will see, on Thursday, we will see like basic concepts inside the synth, like really, like what the envelopes are. We will see this design better. And eventually we have other topics that come ahead. So I hope that this is interesting and that we can keep it cool. And then we have a lot of like the demonstrations of synths, right? Like how they sound, you know. Before we go, let's just have a little sound here at this demonstration of the Mini Moog. What can you do with it? I mean, obviously, you can do almost anything you want with it. Monophonic. It's a monophonic synth. But it has a super 80s feel, right, to it. And these fat basses. We have a Moog Fatty in the studio, by the way. I think we used it with one of your groups. I don't know who you were with, if you were in the group of the synth or not, but yeah. Yeah, no. Well, but you were in Israel and in Egypt, which is not a bad thing. So, all right, thanks for this lecture, for being here with me, and I'll catch you on Thursday to talk more about synths. Where is this? Should I stop it? Yes. Thank you.